Hello everyone, welcome in to Discography Tier Maker, where I take a band, look at all their studio full release albums, and we break them down into tiers, from gold to trash. This band was chosen by my patrons over on patreon.com/rocked. Thank you to everyone that voted. By a one vote difference, we are doing A Day to Remember today. There are 7 full albums we're covering. We are not going to be discussing the EPs or the live albums just for the sake of brevity, and I think 7 albums is more than enough. How this works for everyone that's interested, we will be going through one by one in chronological order. I'll give a brief synopsis, give my thoughts, and then let everyone in the live chat vote. 2005, after recording everything in a bedroom or a basement, regarding of who you ask, this was the birth of A Day to Remember. And I can't help but praise a young band in a town that did not have a lot of youth and a lot of this style of music in the scene going for it in Ocala, Florida, to come out like this. This is what led the band to getting eventually signed to Victory Records for years, by the way. And you can say what you want about Victory Records. This was the true independent release. For true independent releases on your own, homemade, you could do worse. You could do a lot worse. It's not the most memorable stuff they've made. It's not the cleanest sounding they've made, both like recording and mixing wise, and also just hooky and memorable wise. Guitar riffs are fine. And I think that's a good way to say it. It's fine. It's actually pretty solid for a debut too. Keep in mind, there was no budget. There was no soundproofed anything. There was just these men making the album. I give them credit. I think that deserves something. And Their Name Was Treason, I feel should get a lot of credit for having that independent will and truly releasing something on their own. Bronze by 75% of the voters. Very nice. I think that's fair. That's fitting. Ba-bam, ba-bam. We just got out of 2005. We're now about to start into the Victory Records days. And depending on who you say that to, you are going to give a lot of flashbacks of to For Those Who Have Hearts. 2007, this is where they start to get noticed. They're starting to get pushed on a label with Victory. They're starting to realize that they have a backing. They can have a budget to not have to record in a bedroom or a basement, which is huge for a band from Ocala, which did not have the means or studio work that they could afford to do anything like that either. Even if I don't love it, it's not my favorite from A Day to Remember. There is a lot of good stuff on this, and this proved they know how to step it up on a professional level and on a technique level. If you listen to songs like this, my favorite was, I wrote it down, the Plot to Bomb the Panhandle, which was one of the ones I discovered much later after the album came out. You Should Have Killed Me When You Had the Chance was also one that I remember as well. I remember hearing that, of all places, on SiriusXM back in the day when a lot of the stations didn't even exist. It might have been Faction if that was even back around that long. That I don't know. I'd have to check on that one. So a lot of you are talking about this one, and I feel this one had a lot of also rework songs and things like that. I think this is a good, strong step up. I am between silver and bronze myself on this one. That's where I stand. I get there's going to be a lot of argument on this one just because this is such a higher step up. Even if I don't love it from front to back, there's definite improvement. 70% of the vote went to silver. I'm not going to argue it. I was between silver and bronze on it, like a light silver or a high bronze, low silver. So you know what? I'll cater to the audience on that one. I have no problem with that. Silver for those who have hearts. A Day to Remember is getting asked to do tons of crazy stuff with other bands. Victory Records is pushing this group as one of their biggest names. You understand like the articles and alt press, which is what caught my attention and introduced me to this band back in 2009. We get a little homesick. This was my jumping on point. I didn't look back after that. I felt they proved to everyone they were here to stay. Jeremy found his voice in the best way possible. His uncleans were more refined. His clean singing was smoother. The guitar work really had much more personality. Everything across the board. Homesick was great. And I felt it was an album that also was very accessible to the style of music for people that had never really listened to anything either. It was a good entry point into metalcore and that metalcore / pop punk style for bands that can do both. A Day to Remember proved they can do all that. I've Made of Waxwary is exactly what you think it is. That's such a high tier song that makes everyone happy. as soon as you hear it live. There's so much to talk about that don't have time to go song by song on. Mr. Highway's Thinking About the End is also a very non-standard A Day to Remember song at the time, but at the same time, it also works so well. When you hear Disrespect Your Surroundings, you have to give a little respect to something like this for Homesick. Tied, in my opinion, for A Day to Remember's best, if that makes sense. I can't say if it's my favorite A Day to Remember album. I can easily say it's tied for their best work, though. One of the best breakdowns. This is a breakdown city on this album. I think that kind of made sure it was a trope after a while, but in a good way. And I feel like this had that true personality in the music. I talked about the guitar work. I mean that for the lead and rhythm. I mean, Jeremy sounds cleaner and better on this one. They kept refining. They kept making sure to give their personality, their sense of ferociousness, and also lightheartedness in the right doses at different points in Homesick. Gold wins it handily at 89%. Easily wins. I'm kind of happy about that. I kind of figured to, and that makes sense to me. We then move on just over a year after for What Separates Me From You. This is where A Day to Remember was not slowing down. Everything was ramping up. Victory Records was also kind of breathing down their necks, starting the start of that phase as well, to make sure they keep pushing out stuff and keep working mercilessly. However, A Day to Remember kept up with it. They knew the demand was high for this band, and they proved to everyone they can keep up, and they know how to take center stage, and they can give their fans what they wanted. I feel that the follow-up to Homesick, which is a hard thing to follow up, What Separates Me From You, is great. Not just good, great. They knew what they were doing on this one. They had their own personality and style nailed down, which I feel is easily one of the most accessible to the mainstream, and as well as keeping your original fan base happy style of songs you could ever ask for. This is the house that Doubt built. It always stuck with me for whatever reason. Second Sucks is still a huge, huge song live for A Day to Remember. It probably will be for the rest of the band's career too. All signs point to Lauderdale. They always have the Florida references, and I get that. Even something like that works. There's so many good things about this. And not everything in the Day to Remember camp was peaches and cream at the time either. Not everything was sunshine. Victory Records was rough. That this is where you can be proud to be a Day to Remember fan at that time period because you knew they could deliver. Second Sucks has a great music video. Stay tuned for that after the Tear Maker. Every A Day to Remember albums are good. Second Suck goes off. I mean, when you hear All I Want, it's hard to ignore how versatile a track like that is. And you know that's A Day to Remember too. There's no mistaking it, which is also great. So, I personally think, even if I don't like it as much as Homesick by a hair, I still cannot stress enough, this is a fantastic album. I would still say gold. I would be like low gold, high silver on something like this. And the fact that it's less than 2 years removed from Homesick proved the ball was rolling and they were not slowing down. There was so much momentum and they capitalized on it. Gold by 2/3 ratio. So not as dominant as Homesick, but still a gold ratio, 67%. I think that's pretty fair. No one's going bronze, aluminum, or trash for anyone that's voting, so I like that just fine as well. Ta-da-ta-da. Let's get this going over here. This is a strong showing so far for A Day to Remember. A Day to Remember at one point used to be one of the best bands you could see live. They did so much. The set designs were so fun and intricate. In 2013 and 2014, they were doing so many great things, and Common Courtesy stepped up the level of production and status for A Day to Remember. Still really trying to shake off the chains of Victory. And that's such a weird thing to say, but the chains of Victory Records is a thing. But the longer I listened to it that year, the more I dove into it, the more I loved it. And that's that type of album that is good when you hear it. It's great when you hear it the first time, but there's just so much. And it is a front to back album that I could not get enough of. And it just took so much time to sink in and really get into. There's so many great things, but when it kicks off with Right Back at It Again, and then carries into Sometimes You're the Hammer, I feel like you just can't ask for more from a band who has consistently delivered at that point to everyone's specific desires for a band like this. And I say this very, not harshly, but very opinionated on this. Typical metalcore fans, not even on the pop punk side that Day to Remember likes to phase into as well. On the metalcore side, metalcore fans hate variation. They hate when you try to do things different. They want metalcore, and that's it. A Day to Remember never fit that box. Whether you like A Day to Remember or not, they always tried to have their own fun and try to do things differently. For a lot of bands, they set the tone. They are the ones that inspired other groups that would come later. Common Courtesy was that top shelf, highly polished package that everyone knew was something to aspire to. Singles were strong. The album was complete. Everyone was on fire at that point. There's so many great things about Common Courtesy that really make people happy to be a Day to Remember fan. Kind of like Homesick, kind of like What Separates Me From You. But the fact that so much happened, they were able to push through all that contract and label and legal mess from Victory Records and give something like this that everyone thought was amazing. It was their lesson learned the hard way, just like the song. This is gold for me. This is tied up there for my favorite A Day to Remember album. I don't know how you all feel on this one. Just looking back on something like that and seeing how much they accomplished in a relatively short amount of time is huge. They deserved the success they had at that point. Not only is Common Courtesy gold, it got gold unanimous. Pretty awesome. No argument from me. 3 golds in a row. We then move on a couple years later. Massive tours. There's more business shakeups, I guess, and I won't bore with everything that for A Day to Remember. Jeremy has become such a figurehead for that style of music. Bad Vibrations was a little bit different. This had much more of a punk identity. And I remember hearing that when I got Bad Vibrations the first time. People say it's a big letdown when compared to Common Courtesy. I get the viewpoint of it not being as good as Common Courtesy. I by no means think it's bad, though. I still take it over their debut. I take it over just their first 2 albums. I feel it still had such a strong thing, but there's so many good things on this album. And I remember listening back to that. It had a little bit more of a punk flair to it, which I think made it help stand out a little more for Bad Vibrations when you compare it back to Homesick, when you compare it even to Common Courtesy. It stands out a little more because of that. I think that's what gives it that identity. Bad Vibrations is also a nice little play on words. I don't know why, I'm a sucker for that as well. The backlash comes because it was not Common Courtesy Part 2, or it wasn't as complete of a package as Common Courtesy. And I think that's very harsh. That's a very harsh way to look at it. It's unfair to A Day to Remember, but at the same time, I do not think this album is bad. It's not trash. It's not aluminum level. It's not even bronze level, in my opinion. Because there's some moments where it's like, okay, this is kind of just stock. But there's also some moments that really stand out, guys. It is different, but it's not a huge step down. That's where I stand with Bad Vibrations. They did go more pop punk on this album, which is why people are not fond with it. I get that too. And again, the metalcore crowd does not like change and they do not like variety. This had much more pop punk and even punk flair to it. And I think that's why it stands out. 91% of you said silver. I think that's fair. No one said trash. No one said aluminum. So you know what? I think silver works. I think that's a fair assessment for what it is. And you look at this hierarchy right now, what we have for the first 6 albums. There are many bands out there that would kill for a career like that. Years go by. A Day to Remember has massive success. Self-Help Fest happens. They launched their own charity raising festival. I got to shoot that in Orlando. So many great things are happening for A Day to Remember. 2019 pops along. They announced that they have a new single coming out called Degenerates. And they announced that they signed with Fueled by Ramen. Those last 3 words I said in that sentence, Fueled by Ramen, was where everyone hit the panic button. It's weird to think in 2019, the backlash was so strong that they delayed the album. The week of, it was supposed to come out in November of 2019. And they delayed it the week of. I remember Gretchen and I were talking about that when it came out. Or it was supposed to come out, when they gave the little handwritten notes. the then pandemic happened, and they would go live on Facebook Live, on YouTube, social media, whatever it was, and talk about they still weren't sure of album artwork. They still didn't have all the songs made. Say what you want about a band trying to change and update their style and sound. A Day to Remember heard it all. A Day to Remember is very tapped in. They're not oblivious to their fans, to the news, to everything. 2121 came, and You're Welcome disappointed too many people. There were songs on You're Welcome that were not only awful and some of the worst in A Day to Remember's discography, but some of the worst songs of the year. The album was just plagued by bad writing, bad instrument design. That electronic sheen and polish was so processed that it felt like it was bot produced. I remember when I played the song Bloodsucker live on New Music Night and people straight up lost their minds. The singles were so wildly hit and miss that people couldn't even agree on what was good and what was not. The album ended on a pop country ballad and Everything We Need. There's a reason why I put You're Welcome as the worst album of 2021 in all the genres I cover. It felt so empty. Is the whole album trash? No, it's not. There are things that work on the album. There are. But the amount of absolutely bad things on the album far outweighs the good, and that's what's disappointing in my opinion. You made a playlist called Good Songs on Your Welcome. Fair. Not a bad idea. 50% aluminum. Trash the second rating after that. That's wildly interesting to me. So some of you guys are trying to make some type of defense for it. Oh, I put trash because the bad parts are so bad and they far overwhelm any highlights. Just because you guys all feel the same way. This is like even if I were to keep in my vote, it still would not outvote aluminum on this one. A Day to Remember have had a wild career. And in 2022, they released a new single called Miracle. And boy, oh boy, did that give us some hope. I am very excited and anticipate what's next for A Day to Remember. I remember saying last year at the end of the year list I made when talking about You're Welcome, I'm still a Day to Remember fan. I'm not turning in my fan card. I want to see what they have next. That being said, if you're on YouTube, drop a comment. Let me know what you guys would rank each album. Also, let me know your favorite album overall. Until then, thank you to everyone on Twitch for viewing. And let me know what albums and discography you would want to cover next. Thanks again to the patrons who voted for A Day to Remember. I think this was a good one to cover because there's a lot to talk about with a band like this, and there's a lot of great music to discover on this one. So, if you're wondering what to check out for A Day to Remember and where to start, there's a good 3 albums that we decided were gold. That's probably your best bet.